Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are back in War Thunder, back onto the last part of looking at this development World War Mode news article that Gaijin made. We're on the third part, which is Battle, which is probably the most important, even though looking at the global map and the introduction is interesting, and the operations, looking from it from a global point of view and seeing what commanders and stuff like that are going to do, how the structure is going to work is interesting. The battles part is probably the area which is going to affect the majority of players who play this mode, the grunts on the ground. Not everybody can be Owen Rommel or Montgomery. Most people are going to be John Smith on the front lines fighting the battles for them. So let's get into it. Battles in World War Mode reflect the circumstances under which the armies clash. For example, an air raid, an assault on an entrenched army, etc. This is why we added several unique mission types to World War Mode. In convoy missions, players have to defend a column of AI vehicles against the opposing team, which can attack the convoy using air or ground forces. Defense missions are tank battles where one team must defend a strategic point against the enemy. In anti-air defense missions, the aircraft of one team must bomb the fortifications of the other team, which must repel the raid using anti-air guns. Cover missions are bomber escort missions. Collision course missions are like cover missions, but with bombers on both sides. Air supremacy missions will be familiar to War Thunder old-timers, air battles with restricted capture zones, or a restricted capture zone. This is interesting, because what this is showing there are more modes that they're actually going to add to the game, or at least more mission types, which is something that at least in ground forces I felt have definitely been needed. Now it seems like we're going to get a lot of interesting ideas thrown into World War Mode, and maybe they are regurgitated in different parts of the game, and that really makes me happy. When it comes to convoy missions and stuff like that, it's nice to see that we have missions developed around ships. If we actually look right now, there isn't really any of them. The only ones that come to mind is when you play single missions or in the dynamic campaign where you have to bomb certain ships, but nothing to do with defending columns of AI vehicles. The only time you really have that in the game right now is if you play those single missions or dynamic campaigns and cover bombers. But we've never had it in a ship capacity, and definitely not in a tank capacity. So I really hope that we have that going forward. I think that will actually be really interesting. Now, the only issue that all of these modes are going to run into is the same thing that we see in events all the time, where stuff like anti-air defense missions have actually been shown. People find the most optimal way to play it, and that's all they do the whole time. When it comes to missions from the War Thunder Chronicles, it's exactly the same thing. I took some screenshots and basically showed how the majority of players were playing exactly the same vehicles. There was a few days around Volokholamsk and basically the ending of the war in Russia where it was just T-34-85s, D5Ts versus Panthers, because they were the best vehicles and people gravitated towards them. The issue with World War Mode is it's going to have to run into this problem as well, so hopefully we shall see some interesting ways around it. Probably the easiest way around it is something that they have talked about before, which instead of bringing in your own vehicles into the battle, your vehicles are kind of chosen for you. So therefore what happens with that is you can't just bring in the most optimum thing for the mission. You generally get given some. Now this will also annoy some players, but I think it will be a lot more fair, which in the long run is a lot better. Of course it will annoy some players, as I said, because they won't be able to play what they want. Maybe a fighter pilot who really likes playing fighters, maybe sometimes he has to play an attacker or a bomber, and he won't be happy with that. But the majority of time, I'm sure there will be options available for anyone who wants to play whatever they want. New mission types is always nice, especially when it comes to ships. We have had a massive push towards the naval part of War Thunder. Before ships was announced, to be quite honest, there wasn't really a lot to do with ships in the game. There was a few missions here and there, but if you actually go to PvP modes, they're generally just targets that you hit, and that's about it, and they're never the main target either. so it's nice to see them in the game. When it comes to the air battles with a restricted capture zone, I do remember a few years ago playing stuff like that. There was a few arcade battles which actually had that in, and it was okay. It generally, because the area was so big, it basically came down to the fact whoever had planes left at the end of it. What people would do is, because it was in a certain area of the map, you couldn't go away from it for too long, otherwise the other team would capture it. So it's kind of a way to force people to fight around it and get engaged. Very much the same reasoning why in Ground Forces we have 3 capture points as well. Give each side a way to fight the battle from either side, but still trying to pinpoint them into areas so they can fight. So it's nice to see them coming back. I haven't seen them in an extremely long time, so I wonder how, or if they've improved them or anything like that, because once again they did have issues. And going on to the next bit, we'll have to see how it works in this mode. Battles take place in a common mode, RB with markers. We made this decision because logically there can only be one world war happening at any one time, so there should be only one mode available. Enemy vehicle markers aren't visible across the entire map, but the detect enemy function is higher than in classic RBs. Okay, that is actually pretty good. I've seen a lot of people complain about the fact that it is RB with markers. I mean, in aircraft already we have RB with markers, and I don't think it's a general issue. It will be applied to tanks, so it will be very similar to how realistic tanks used to be. And when it came to a lot of players, they disagreed with the decision to have them, and therefore they were taken away. I think it is completely fine in Ground Forces to have these markers in. Basically because it means that everybody fights under the same rules, whether they be in the air, whether they be in Ground Forces, and also the fact that you want to try and attract more people who play arcade battles to this World War mode. They have tried to make it realistic, as I said, RB with markers, but you've got to understand that the majority of the player base of War Thunder does still play arcade battles. It is seen as as much more of an arcadey game compared to a realistic game, and that is completely fine because it has wonderful realistic elements as well. But if you want to create a new mode which is going to appeal to a lot of people, not just the people who play realistic and simulator like myself, you're going to have to open it up and have some leeway in places. And I think putting markers into the game when it comes to this is completely fine. You can also justify it in another way. It's very easy to justify it. What you say is you have commanders, or you have regimental operators, or you have generals, and they have done a reconnaissance of the area. They have recon planes all over the place, and they have spotters on the hills and stuff like that to be able to spot the enemies, and therefore that is why you know where they are. That would be the rationalization that you could use if you needed to look at it realistically. Something that is kind of interesting is the fact that they're obviously not visible across the whole map, but the detect function is higher than in classic RBs. This makes me think that what we're going to see is larger maps, which is something we definitely need if we push towards this mode. Boulogne-sur-Mer is a map that I've talked about quite a lot and had a lot of high praise for. And I think it is one of those maps which will favour itself to this World War mode. It is an absolutely huge map. You could have a whole war on it by yourself. If you just chucked, 200 players on it, it would be absolutely insane and it would be fun as hell. But with the classic RB mechanics, it would be very hard for tanks and anything to see each other. Because the map is so big, and also there's an ocean in the way if you decide you want to go on one side compared to the other. So that is, if we look at a scale size of that map and even cut it in half and use that as a scale, think about like Norway. If you didn't have these classic RB markers being able to detect at higher ranges, then you're really going to struggle to spot anything. And what's going to happen is you're going to run into an objective over and over again, and there's just going to be people waiting for you. Because as I've said many times in the past, War Thunder does favor a defender massively over the person who's trying to attack, and that is basically down to the fact that whoever gets the first shot off generally wins the engagement, which is very similar to how it actually worked and still works in modern day combat. It's something to think about when, instead of just having a gut-wrenching reaction and saying, no, I don't like this, it is different to what I'm used to. You've got to remember that the majority of the community does not play realistic or does not play simulator, which is why Enduring Confrontation, even though it's a great test, generally it didn't appeal to a lot of people because it is simulator battles. I'm sure it got a few people into simulator or playing more of simulator like it did myself, but to the common player who plays arcade and just, enjoys his time around a small map trying to shoot anything it can down, it isn't going to appeal to them. So you have to throw them a bone to try and get them interested, which is why that is here. One of the most obvious differences in World War Mode is its unique respawn system, which we have already tested a few times in events. Each side has several types of vehicles, and the number and types of vehicles are determined by each army's current resources. Players on each side are randomly assigned vehicles from the specific, battle-specific selection, but only the types of and quantities that the army has in possession for the current battle. So this is awesome. I actually really like this. The reason why I do like this is because it takes out the fact that people are just going to pick the most optimum thing. Hopefully it doesn't work like it did in the War Thunder Chronicles events, where if you got enough spawn points you could spawn in the larger vehicles, even if there was a limit on them. I hope from the start of the battle we have this, where you get to pick a certain type of vehicle, and that's what you get, and then you roll from there. I think that could work very positively. It will lead into a lot of battles where you have some lower skilled people in the better vehicles and higher skilled people in the worse ones, but maybe that works out in your favor. Maybe that's how you want it. Maybe you want it the other way around. Hopefully over time it will balance itself out. One of the big issues with War Thunder is it does have a random matchmaking system when it comes to player skill, and it is definitely something that has to be addressed if we're going to look at World War Mode, especially if you have one side which is going to be highly favoured over the other. It is something that Gaijin has to think about, and hopefully this can be rectified in the respawn system that they've outlined here. I don't see why it shouldn't. Also, hopefully this eliminates the how effective crews can be. I'm not sure if it will or not. I'm not sure how that works. But you've got to remember that a lot of people have different skilled crews. So one of my American tank crews is full. It is completely full, it is aced out, it has an expert crew, it is, the best it can be. Same with my planes. I have one crew, my fighter crew, which is completely aced out when it comes to what it needs to be. It doesn't have anything in gunners, but it doesn't need to. Now, is it fair for me to use that crew in a World War Mode setting against a player who only has, let's say, half crew points? Some people will say, I've worked very hard to get those crew points. Technically it is my tank, even though it's, I don't get to choose it. I should be able to use the crew that I've created. I'm not so sure about that. I think it's much better to put people on a level playing field, and using this system means that maybe you could do that. Maybe you could give everyone 50% crews, and if that doesn't work, you can always go back to the system that we have already in game, where people are rewarded for their experience. But generally the more experienced players should also be the better players, at least when it comes to raw killing and raw winning. So I'm not sure if they're gonna put that in or not. I would like to see it personally. Everybody has the same crews, just for the sake of fairness. The results of each battle directly influence the course of the operation. Every vehicle lost in battle is deducted from the army's forces, and defeat in battle may result in the army retreating or even getting captured. This means that your actions have consequences, so it's not just a random event like the War Thunder Chronicles thing, like floats, like anything like that. your actions in battle have consequences, and that's a big thing that it seems like generally people want when it comes to multiplayer games. It is something that is always repeated, that they want their actions to mean something. And well, in World War mode, that's exactly what you're going to get. You're going to get a lot of battles. If you win them, you're going to push the enemy back. They're maybe going to lose some forces, and eventually you're going to be able to destroy that army or even capture it, which means that you have fundamentally won that battle. The vice versa can happen as well. You can be on the massive defensive. You may not have a lot of troops left because you've lost a few of the battles through the operation, but you can still fight back. You can still go for it. And it means that every vehicle counts. Everything that an individual player does counts towards the overall system, and that is what you have to do to create a game which people are invested in. You have to make them believe that their decisions make a difference, and hopefully this does. Hopefully it does. Even if your team is losing but you're doing well, you can, you're contributing to maybe making a comeback. Maybe you can carry your team in the next battle when the next operation happens after the commander has decided where you want to fight. I think that is something that is fundamental that has to be added to this mode. Otherwise it's dead on its ass from the beginning. So it's nice to see it go into coming game. Make use of strategic opportunities on the operation map to gain the upper hand in battle. Reduce your opponent's numbers with each vehicle you destroy and drive back the enemy with each victory. The outcome of some of the most important operations in the Second World War now depends on you. The start of the World War mode will be we will announce separately. Follow the news. That's awesome. You know how happy I am that this is finally here? Or at least we are getting more details about it. My guess is that this will be something that will be released after Naval Forces, which, maybe in about a year's time. I can't see this coming before at least the start of Naval Forces, like Naval Forces being put into open beta. So hopefully this comes along in at least, less than a year. But I'm definitely not thinking this is going to come in like a week's time. I mean, we've just had the Italian aircraft announced. We've had ships getting a whole revamp with bigger ships like destroyers and stuff like that. Update 1.69 we already know is going to focus on the Regio Aeronautica, whatever it's called, the Italian Air Force with some other aircraft. This looks like a long-term plan. And we knew it was going to be a long-term plan from the beginning. Gaijin have even told us it is a long-term plan. And it seems like we are in a position where we actually know what's going on. They have some screenshots, they have some images, they have all of this stuff. They, have told us at least the outline of what's going to go on. There's a lot of details I'm still very unsure about, but I'm sure in the coming months we're going to learn more and more about it. And this, I think, will be the mode that I'm going to focus on. I really like the idea of having this mode, having, looking over an army, seeing what our army group is doing, if we're going the right way, if we're getting pushed back, what is our commander doing, do we need to mutiny him, do we need to do anything like that to win the battle overall. Look at our supply count, do we have enough tanks, do we have enough aircraft, maybe we can hit this factory over here. Maybe we can hit it with bombers. Maybe if we do that, that means that the enemy is going to lose supply. Maybe they lose the supply in that sector. Maybe that means we can get some reinforcements, get a bit of, get a bit of leeway, get a bit of momentum going. So all of that just sounds absolutely wonderful to me. And after reading this article, even though it doesn't specifically go into the specifics, there is a lot more here compared to what there was before, which makes me really happy to see it coming on, especially when we look at the screenshots and how it's going to lay out. I just hope it doesn't get stretched too thin too quickly. I think a better way of going about this would be to focus on a small area, let's just say Europe, because obviously in the grand scheme of things that would be a small area. Focus on that, nail down the battles, nail down how the operations work out how you're gonna do commanders and who's gonna figure that out. Make sure that the AI is in a good position, because obviously that's a big deal which we need to deal with, and then expand it. I think that would be how I personally would do it. But it seems like they're looking at much more of a global thing to start off with. So they have a lot of confidence in this product. I have quite a lot of confidence in this product, but we'll have to see as the months go on what else we see. So at this moment in time, I'm looking forward to the Italians. I can't wait them to be here, but this is definitely on the back burner in my mind. I'll see you next time.